Hello, everyone. Welcome to Espresso with Matt. I am here with my very good friend and one of the best mentors I've ever had in my career, my good friend Donna Mozet. Good morning, Donna. How are you today?
I'm good, Matt, having my tea with you and enjoying the opportunity. Thank you.
I get to, yes, Donna is a tea drinker. I've actually had a string now. The last two people I've had have been tea drinkers and not coffee drinkers, so I'm on quite the streak here. I have in honor of Donna, I have a latte and a croissant. This quick story, Donna, who's just one of the most genuine, nice people you ever met, for the last few months have met with me. We've chose a place called Paris Baguette for our meeting spot over the last few months, and they have good coffee, wonderful croissants, and I always walk out with a few extra things there. And so that's what I'm having today with you, Donna.
And I have to say, Paris Baguette, I do have their decaf cappuccino there because it's really quite delightful, even though I am a tea drinker.
Maybe just give us a quick kind of little overview of your career history, what work you've done, just to get a little context.
Sure. So I have about, I'm going to say more than 45 years of experience in the HR field at various different organizations, mostly in leadership positions. As I said, a variety of industries. I've also been an adjunct professor with FDU, teaching primarily HR development and team leadership classes to master's level students. And I have really had a wonderful career, and I have been very lucky with the leaders and mentors that I've had. When I was at Carrier Clinic back in the early 2000s, I met you, Matt, and you were working at the lodge with the children, and you were quite impressive. And I was very delighted and honored when we had an opportunity to hire you into the HR department. And you began, and you had all the right skills and all the right behaviors, which of course has always been an HR thing, hire for behaviors and train for the skills. You had the skills as well, though, so it was always a career that I knew you would thrive in. So
I always tell this story. When I started in HR, I think I went out as a typical Matt fashion, overdid it a little bit, went out and bought, I think, 4 or 5 books. I had this 100-page volume, HR law. And I came into Donna's office. I've only been doing HR for about a month now. I said, Donna, I'm going to read all these books. And Donna gave me some of I would say one of the best advice I really had. She said, Matt, relax. You'll learn HR, do the right thing, think about doing the right thing. The law, the policy, those things will come. You can develop those, but just think through your decision making. And I remember that, like, working with Don and working on you, your your ability to make the right decision that's ethical, that's just, that's really the best decision for all involved, the best he can, was really impressive right from day one. And I always felt like, okay, Donna's someone I can go to, discuss the issues, and talk through the problems. I mean, how did you kind of develop that skill for leaders out there in HR? Because, HR doesn't always have the best reputation, but you've really held it to such a high standard of ethics and doing the right thing. How do you develop that in your career?
thank you, Matt. That's really very sweet. I think that comes with time and experience. And I also have had, the books you talk about. I've had some thought leaders that have really impacted how I have wanted to behave as a leader. And of course, Marcus Buckingham, one of my
Oh yeah.
guys, one of my favorites, first break all the rules. Then he writes Now Discover Your Strengths, and then he collaborates on the Strength Finders. So there's a whole series there, but basically the gist of it is, know what your strengths are and play to your strengths and work on the other things, but only as much as you have to. And I think that was always an important message for me that, yeah, I wanted to learn budgeting. I wanted to do well in comp and the analytical side of things. But I always knew that I was better at the collaborative, participative management leadership type things that really interested me. What were the problems that people were having, how to deal with them, how to work through them. That was really my thing. And I have to say, I learned a lot from the leaders and mentors I had. You and I both had um, Trish in our lives, and she was a great mentor in terms of how to get things done and really staying on track and staying focused. And so I have a number of people that I also have in my background that have helped to create this. What are my skills and how do I play to them?
About some of the skills that you had that were such things that I maybe realize more now than I did at the time. There were certain things that you did as a leader that were little things that really added up. I thought to myself, can I ever remember a time walking to Donna's office where she didn't come around the desk and sit at the table with me? Never. You never ever spoke behind the table to anyone. Um, it was always a sit down conversation. It was always, no matter how busy you were, you had the time there. You always asked how things were going with everyone there. You knew everyone on your team. Everyone on your team felt comfortable with it. These little things you did. But at the end of the point, what was really important was there was a real substance to you in that you had the technical knowledge, but you were willing to discuss things. And anyone who's worked with me for a while knows that I, I like to discuss, debate, shall we say, at times. And that to me, and sometimes I think out loud. And you always gave me that room to kind of go through my thoughts and then know when to reel me in. And so I always thought about as I became a leader, as I got more in my career, some of the techniques that you had, I had to get better at. I often sometimes would have people come to my office and wouldn't look up from the computer. And I tried to refrain that. So those are little techniques. And then you talk about those big things. So Donna, it was such a great interaction with people that you had. Um, and I think that's one of the things in human resources that you had a skill that you developed. And as you've been a teacher and mentor, how you develop that in other leaders, like that skill to connect with people.
I do think it's practice, practice, practice. And I have to say, I was always in my younger days much more comfortable one-on-one. That always felt much better to me. It took a lot of working to kind of feel comfortable getting up in front of a crowd, getting up and doing presentations. It's an interesting thing to watch yourself develop that way. And that for me was more of a stretch. It was more uncomfortable. I mean, if you go to the classic Myers-Briggs, I'm probably right in the middle between introvert and extrovert. So I had to move to that more extroverted side, um, because that's what I needed to do in the work that we do as HR professionals. And so it took time and it took work at it, and really being able to identify it. And then I had a wonderful boss at one point in time in my life who I worked with for a number of years. And we were going through some major changes in the organization, and I was a little resistant. And this was I was younger in my career. And he said to me one day, you seem a little change adverse. You might want to think about, how you want to deal with that in your career. And it was such a light bulb for me to really understand that I was so comfortable where in my little comfort zone. And so I began then to also think about, how do I expand this? How do I not, you know, stop and say no, or say, I don't think we can do that, but figure out, be more collaborative, be more participative, and figure out how to do those things.
Yeah, and Don, in our experience working together, we had such tremendous change over our time there. And I always felt like one thing I realized with change, I think you helped me come to this, was you had this kind of misnomer that, okay, I'm gonna get through this change and everything's gonna be settled afterwards. And I think you famously told me when I started HR in 2010, I was calm here in the summers, which was, a recruitment I think you were trying to,
A recruitment technique for
yeah.
sure.
But I think that's the other piece of that change is that misnomer that it's somehow you get through the door and you're in this new state, and then you don't have to manage that again. And that constant state of change, both personally, professionally, in organizations, it's a live and breathing thing. And I think that for myself in my career, and then some of the advice that I've heard from many people over the last few months, including yourself, was to look inward and say, what do you need to change? What do you? We were just talking about it before we jumped on camera. A big part of me doing this is pushing myself in a direction to do what I love doing, talking to people, learning, engaging people, but in a new format. It's a change, and I love your story about what was the word change adverse? Was that the word? Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier one of our mutual leaders that we worked with Trish, and I'm fortunate to have worked with so many great leaders, and I think back about all the learnings you had from all the great leaders, and I think a lot of times you understand that each leader brings a different style and a different technique, but in doing that, you run the risk of not being authentic to yourself. You know,
Right.
um, I always felt, Donna, when working with you, you were at a point in your career in your life you were so authentic to yourself and who you were, and I think, developing that, still developing that. How did you get to that point of being authentic and your leadership skills, knowing what you were good at, knowing what your skills were, and really knowing here's my zone, here's how I'm comfortable, and being authentic to others? That's so important. How did you develop that skill?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think again, it's knowing that something's fearful for you or that you're going to be afraid to step into a role or step into a new situation, be in front of people that you haven't been in front of before, and just kind of taking that deep breath and saying, all right, I'm going to do it. I may fail and I may fall down. And I have, many, many times I have messed up and fallen down and, done something not right or hurt someone unintentionally. And I try to reflect back on that and say, okay, so yeah, you really skinned your knee there, but get up, put the bandage on and move forward, and keep doing it. And I think that, again, Matt, watching those that you admire and respect is really a wonderful lesson in how to do it. But there are also those that don't manage well at all that we've all worked for that have very poor leadership styles or are very closed and, not nice people. And there's a lot to learn from that as well, because it teaches us what not to do. And I think I've had some of those bosses, particularly early in my career, where I really learned that how hurtful something might have been for me or how difficult to overcome, and thought I'll never be that kind of a boss.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, Don, well, that is such a great piece of advice to think through that, and I have learned from many and seen many on both sides of it. And I think you take what some things they do really well because they're very proficient in certain areas, whether, whatever it might be, whatever skill they have. Um, and then you realize that there's difference between leadership, management, and task driven,
mhm.
things, and putting people in their zone. I mean, there's I always joke around that I have a lot of skills, but if you ask me to run a 5-minute mile, I couldn't do that with a bike in a stiff wind, right? Don't don't put people in positions where they're going against what their nature is. There's jobs out there for everyone, and there's roles for everyone. And I love that advice, Ron. I think that's great advice to learn from all, and there's learn opportunities from all. What advice would you give, going into the career, human resources? Someone sits down with, I want to work into human resources. What advice are you giving them?
Wow. I think one of it, one thing I would say is, excuse me, one thing I would say is over prepare for all contingencies, because when you're over prepared, you don't feel as um, insecure going into whatever that situation is that you have. Um, I always wanted to know when someone called and said, I have to come to HR and talk to you. I'm having a problem with my boss, or the boss calls and says, I'm having a problem with an employee. I have to come talk to you. I always wanted to have a little more information before that meeting so that I could prepare and have an idea of what direction I wanted the discussion to go in, what it is that I wanted that person to learn or get from the discussion. So I think over preparing is one of the things I would say. The other thing I would say is to really listen. It's very hard. That's a tough skill. And I still struggle with that at times. I'm sometimes jumping ahead and wanting to think ahead. And I really have to back up and say, be in the moment, listen, hear what's being said, and try to be collaborative and try and give whoever you're working with the opportunity to be participative in the decisions.
Well, Don, working with you, you're note keeping and binders were second to none. I mean, talk about over prepared. Donna wrote everything down, documented everything. I am the absolute other end of that spectrum. I would write a word or two on my notes, and I just tend to remember things and those things. So, there's many different ways to get that done, and it's great to partner with people who have different skill sets. And so I always said, okay, I'm going to work with Donna. I know she has the notes for this.
Well, and the funny thing is
Yeah,
that you could always just pull it up.
yeah.
Me, I had to go to the book because I became dependent on that. I had to go to my notes and I had to make sure what was said.
It's just different ways of getting skilled. But I love the idea of being prepared for what you're walking into in HR, and also the idea that you have to be on your feet a little bit and think through things. I always approach HR with the idea of if I make a decision and I had to go on the 6 p.m. news tonight and explain my decision, do I feel comfortable I made the best ethical decision I could? Now, doesn't mean I made the right decision because often you don't, but did I make a defensible, explainable position? And I would always think through that as much as I could with my decision making. And that's where having, do not do HR in a vacuum. Don, I think that's where one of the things that I love working with you and my other people I worked with, whether it was other leaders I worked with in HR over the years, bouncing ideas off and saying, "Hey, this is how it sounds," and sometimes just hearing it out loud, saying, "Ooh, that doesn't sound so good." Let's do it. So I love those things about being prepared, listening. Such key things in HR.
Matt, you're saying about being on the 6 o'clock news. I remember you saying that to me a couple times, and it is an absolute, it's like a glass of water in the face. Oh my gosh, that's right. That is exactly how you need to be thinking. How will other people perceive this? How will other people be feeling about what you just said and how you said it? So that has always been a great thing that you've
Well,
said.
I tell you, working with some of the senior leaders I worked with, sometimes that was just my intervention. Sometimes talk to them, saying, "Can you just repeat that back to me?" And if we had to say that in public, that's what we're going to say. And they're like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Maybe we'll change." But it helps. It helps
Perfect.
talk through that. It
Just
really does.
yeah.
Well, Don, we're getting close to the espresso round of questions here, and I have 4 questions I've been asking on espresso with Matt that I'm curious about. So the first question I have is, what's the best piece of advice you ever had over a cup of coffee or
Be
tea, your
yourself.
place?
Do you be yourself and um there are thousands of books out there on leadership and how to be a good leader, and there are just so many gurus out there and you could read all of them, but you really have to distill that information down and figure out who you are in that and what works best for you. So I would say, to the best of your ability, um, what we've been talking about is so important. Look inside. Is this something you can live with? And be you would probably be the thing I would say would be most important.
Amazing. If you could go back and talk to your younger self starting out in a career, and you have all your years of wisdom, what advice are you giving yourself?
Yeah, so, my husband used to have a saying, Matt, don't pay the price twice. So, it's something that always is back here. So when I'm worried, when I'm concerned, when I haven't felt like I've mastered what I need to master, and I think that maybe there's a situation that I just, did I give the right advice? I have to remind myself that, something's going to happen, and whatever that's going to be prepared for it, but don't worry so much that you're paying the price twice, because if it never happens, you'll have done all this worry and there was nothing, no reason for it, or you prepared for it, you worried a little bit, but you didn't over worry, it happened, and now you just have to handle it and take care of it. So don't pay the price twice.
I think I might get. I don't have tattoos, but I might get that tattoo. I mean, what wonderful sage advice. That was really, really, really great advice there. Have a cup of coffee anywhere in the world with anyone, anytime. What are you doing?
Right here, right now with you, Matt, because this has
Oh my
been
goodness.
lovely. This has been lovely. And you are one of those people that takes it in, synthesizes it, and it comes back out much better than it went in. And I love that about you.
Thank
And
you.
so this was very nice. And I think what the content of what you're doing is so important. And that's where I want to be.
Yeah.
There
Well,
you
Don,
go.
I will say this: if we could bottle up your leadership style and sell it out there to people, I know the world will be a kinder, smarter, better place. And I don't know if you realize that you've made such a tremendous impact on so many, and me included. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
I'm
It's
humbled
been
by your comments. Thank you. Thank you.
wonderful catching up with you again.